Welcome to the Study On podcast. I'm your host, Angie Bauman, and I am passionate about Bible study. Friend, my journey has not been an easy one. I am a trauma and abuse survivor, and I still walk with a limp. But I also walk in freedom because as I've studied God's Word, He has released me from layers of shame and invited me into a life filled with an abundance of His peace, joy, rest, and hope. I'm transformed because I study the Bible, and my heart's desire is to create offerings that help you get and stay in your Bible so you experience that transformation too. So thank you for spending a few minutes with me. Maybe it's as you enjoy your coffee or with pen and notebook ready, or you're driving to work or walking the dog from wherever you are in your day. Let's dive deep into a verse of scripture together. So we walk, steady on. Let's get started. Welcome, friend, into a guest interview episode that shares the testimony of someone whose life has been transformed through studying the Bible. Our guest today is author and speaker Lori-Ann Wood. Lori-Ann is living with chronic heart failure, and she sat with me to talk about the importance of staying connected to God's Word during difficult seasons. I love how Lori-Ann talks about how she viewed her faith before and after her health diagnosis. She describes it as a precious heirloom, something passed down to her that she was afraid to use because she didn't want to break it or mess it up. And as I expressed in the interview, never before in my life have I heard faith described that way, and yet it made perfect sense to me. For those of us who have grown up with family members who were faithful people, what if we try out our faith that was handed down to us, shared with us? What if we try that out in a difficult season only to learn we can't exercise it the way that we were taught, or we can't use it the way that they did? Maybe that's one of the ways the enemy lies to us that makes it tempting for us to walk away instead of staying connected. Obviously, my conversation with Lori-Ann gave me a lot to consider, and I think you will find it gives you a lot to consider too. Let's listen in. Lori-Ann, welcome to the Study On community. I am so excited to have this conversation with you.
Oh, thank you, Angie. I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, well, start us off. This is my question always with my guests now in this season of my podcasting. How did your relationship with Bible study begin? How did God help you realize He wanted to connect with you and teach you through His Word?
Well, I think I have always been a word girl. And so I've always been interested in the way words are arranged. And when they're arranged in a certain way, they touch your heart in a different way. And, anybody that writes or anybody that loves music and songs knows this, that those same words rearranged in a different way can just get into our hearts. And so I think I first, I was always interested in words, but when I was in college, I really got through my boyfriend who had become my husband, really got introduced to Psalms.
Mm.
And at a time when I felt like I really needed that, I got hooked into just the way the words were put together. And I felt like for me and where I was and for my personality, God was really speaking to me through the Psalms. And it was just beautiful and so needed. And turns out many years later, I was diagnosed suddenly with end-stage heart failure, even though I had no risk factors. I had no family history. I was a very healthy person. And what I went back to immediately was these Psalms.
Yes.
And I really attached at that moment to the Psalms of Lament because they had such real feelings in them, and they were what I was feeling. And there were questions in there that I was asking. And what I didn't realize until later is that almost all of those Psalms of Lament end in a statement of praise. So,
Yes.
it was the way the words were put together. I could sift the truth of God's presence out of all my difficult feelings. And so I really have got hooked on the Psalms in college, and they have really lasted my whole life.
Mm. I love that so much. A lot of times when we're struggling, we hear people talk about the book of Job. right? Like that Job's struggle and all that he went through. But I had a similar surprising medical season. I was in a head-on car crash. My listeners who are
Mm,
regulars here know that. And that when that happened, everything in my life like stopped. Like nothing was the same. I didn't take care of myself. And really at that point, I could not have absorbed something like the book of Job. I couldn't receive it, even though I knew it. But the Psalms were words that were simple statements that touched my heart, that were beautiful words and language. And so much of what we were saying, the lamenting was allowed, the praise was encouraged, and the ability for the Psalms to share space with those emotions was exactly what I could hear from the Lord during that's all I wanted read. When somebody said, "What can I do?" I'm like, "Read me the Psalms," right? Because
yeah.
that's where God, I could hear God in them. So I
Mm.
love that that's how he got a hold of your heart too. Can I ask, were you going through something particularly difficult or discouraging that God used the Psalms when you first fell in love with the word? Or is that just, and I use the word just lightly, is that just where you happened to land and he got a hold of you?
I don't remember other than just the pressures of being
Sure.
a kid in college. I don't remember anything particular, but I do remember not having thought of the Psalms as a particular place to go to
Yeah.
until that point. Like I would hear them, and yes, they're in the Bible, but
Mhm.
it was never a direct destination
Mhm.
until, and I think there was a class at the university center that centered around Psalms, and we just focused on them. And
Yeah.
that became a thing for me where I was like, I can just go straight to Psalms. And just opened up a whole new world and just really spoke to me. And, I look back after my diagnosis, and everything I was posting on social media was a psalm, part of
Mm,
a psalm, because that was what, and they came in, like you said, they came in such little pieces,
yeah.
but that's what I could process at that
Same.
time.
Yes. Yeah. One promise at a time, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Or one sorrow at a time. Yeah. That's
Mm.
yeah. When you, especially when you're in a place where you're grieving or you're struggling or you're just in this place of immense insecurity and uncertainty. I can handle a lot of it at the same time, but that was what I could handle. Put you on the spot. Do you have a favorite or two, a go-to psalm that just no matter what, it just
Ugh.
always covers you with God's goodness?
Yeah, I do have a lot of them. I really love, and maybe it's just because of my heart type of thing that I have, but I really love Psalm 73.
Mm.
There's a verse in there. It says, "My health may fail and my spirit may grow weak, but God remains the strength of my heart. He is
Oh,
mine forever."
I
And
love
that has
that.
always been one that I've gone back to because, heart failure is chronic, progressive. It doesn't go away, which I was not familiar with anything that was chronic. But that tells me that it's not a mistake. This is things happen, we're made to wither away, and but God remains forever. And so I go back to that one. There's another one about and I don't know the verse of it. I think it might
That's
be in
okay. I put you on the
61.
spot. Yeah, I did.
But
I always
there's
say
an
we don't have to know the address to know the promise, right? So that's okay. That's okay.
okay, it might
Yeah.
not be there, but it says, "Lead me to the rock that is higher than I."
Mm.
And I always think about that because one of the things with heart failure is inclines. You just do not have the stamina, the breath support to do any kind of inclines. But when I read that psalm about leading me to the rock that's higher than I don't have to climb it. It's not up
Yeah.
to me to climb it. So
Mm.
I love that one as well.
Yeah, that's good. I want to ask a personal follow-up question. Well, I just want to inquire about your health and how it is now, but I also want to ask, like, listener, I get to look at Lorianne right now, and you don't look like there's anything wrong with you from my perspective. Like, so how is your health right now, and how do you handle the fact that obviously you probably have some limitations, but they're not really visible on the outside?
Mm. That's, I think, one of the challenges and then there's so many invisible illnesses, but
Yes.
Um, I it has given me such an appreciation for people and given people so much grace that I, should have been giving them all along. But my heart function was at 6% when I was diagnosed, which was just about not compatible with life. And then I went through medications. I got a device. I had some dietary changes to put on a whole lot of medication. And then I climbed to almost near normal at one point. But in the last 4 years, it dropped again. And I was in really active heart failure. Within the last year, I got a new device, but my heart function has dropped twice. And so now it's at 20%. And I'm very high functioning, which is a blessing, but my day is very abbreviated from both ends because heart failure makes you very exhausted because your heart's
Sure.
working so hard.
Sure.
But the kind of the double whammy is the medication that treats it also causes fatigue. And so I know how much I need to rest, and I just have to abide by that. And
Wow.
then some days are just bad days and you just don't get anything done. But as far as the invisible part of it goes, it is difficult because people don't see. I, you know, I remember a couple of times trying to move one of my kids into college, and this was right before I had my first surgery and my heart function was really low. I tried to get a parking pass at this really hilly campus so I could move them in without having to go up and down the hills, and they didn't want to give me one. And yeah, it happened a couple of other times, but it's really opened my eyes, and because I think about, depression and so many other physical ailments even that people are just pushing through, just
Yes.
trying to stay up in the world that's full of healthy people and still trying to prove that, I heard someone say that when you have an invisible illness, sometimes people think that you're trying to pretend to be sick, but really what you're doing is you're pretending to be well
Wow.
most of the time. So
Mm.
that's kind of the thing. The great news is that my family and community and church family, they all get it because it's been going on for several years. And so it's a blessing of that familiarity, but still a
Right.
challenge at
Yeah.
times.
Thank you for letting us into that. Thank you for letting us hear and understand that part of your journey. I hear someone who undoubtedly, Lorianne, has been challenged to trust the Lord, especially if you need that kind of rest. Because I'm guessing that we have some things in common in that we have a lot that we want to get done. And I'm
Mhm.
guessing also that there are things that you want to get done every day that probably have to wait, right?
Mhm.
So help me understand, what does that have to do with Bible study? Maybe why is it challenging for us? Like when we're going through something like that, it seems like that's sometimes one of the first things we let go. And I just wondered if you would
Mhm.
address that. Like, what's that been like for you? Why are we so tempted to let it go? How do we lean in instead? Talk to us about that a
Mhm.
little bit, if you would.
Yeah. Well, I think a couple of things come to mind. It has to do, first of all, with what we were talking about earlier and what you mentioned that when you're going through something really hard, I mean, it's science tells us that our attention spans shrink. And so we are processing a lot of different things and our attention span gets really small. And then, you couple that with the fact of fatigue and adjusting to new meds and all of that, and that weighs into it. But I think there's a spiritual factor in it also. Um, and I think maybe a lot of people are like this. I felt like I was handed an heirloom faith. I've known about God all my life. And when I got that, it felt so precious. And when the storms of life started to come after my diagnosis, I thought, what am I going to do with this faith? That's so precious. I don't want to break it. And so I put it on a shelf because I was trying to protect it and keep it and not mess it up because I didn't know if I took it down and used it, if I would break it. And so I put it on a shelf for a while. And, you know, I, I didn't know what would happen, but I thought when my life comes back together and this resolves, I'll get my faith back down. But the biggest challenge or the biggest risk that I was running at that point was that I would never come back and take that faith off the shelf. And part of it is because when we're in the middle of this, and it doesn't have to be a health crisis, it can be something going on with a relationship or your finances or anything. And it just seems overwhelming. And you think, what if God doesn't come through?
Mm.
I might have to cover for him. And it would be easier if I just left him out of the equation for a while and didn't have to be responsible for that. And you even get to a point sometimes where you feel responsible for other people's faith that are praying for you. So I put him up there and thought, I can't run the risk of breaking this. My kids were raised in the church. I had a very faithful family. I can't break it now. So, and I think a lot of us do that whether we know it at the time or not. It just feels like we can't engage with what we thought we knew.
Yeah. I I have never heard faith described like that, Lorianne, and I love it. Like, I'm gonna continue to sit with that. I almost, like, can't move forward right now because I think you are so right, especially when we come from a faith-filled family and we don't like, what if I take this out and exercise it, but my questions change it? Or my doubts paint it, or when we've never needed to put it into practice the way that we're needing it in whatever we're in. And what we don't know is that other people have taken it out and used it too, right? But maybe we don't see that, or maybe they haven't, who knows, depending on, our own circumstances and experiences. But this idea that it's too precious to use, it reminds me of like, our china we get for our wedding or something like
Mhm.
that. And we don't take it down and use it because we're afraid of breaking it. But the reality is then it's just collecting dust and it's not serving us and it's not bringing us joy and it's not, or something like that. It reminds me of that, the way you're describing it. I think that's
Mhm.
really profound what you're saying. That's
Mhm.
challenging me. I know it's challenging the listeners today too, to just think about what is the obstacle to asking God the questions like Job did. We talked about Job, like, where are you in this? Right? Hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the thing that, our tendency is to protect it because we do think it's precious. So it comes
Hmm.
almost from a good place, but
Right.
our what ends up happening is, instead of getting it down and using it and contending with it, we we just put it up there like you say, like your china. My mom had a vase that uh we broke most of her stuff when we were
This is
kids.
why we can't have nice things.
Exactly, exactly. But there was this vase I remember her having, and at the estate sale, I'm like, "I want that vase." And in my mind, it was pristine and perfect. But when I got home and looked at it, I realized she had glued it back together on the back.
Wow.
And I do remember her using it. I do remember it out all the time, and that's why I wanted it because I recognized it. But I didn't realize that we had broken it and putting it back together, and it was just as beautiful. In fact, it's more beautiful to me now that I know that and I can see that. But it's so true. And what we don't get is that if we can get that faith down, like that vase or the china or whatever, and use it and contend with it and bring it into real life, really what happens with our faith is it gets stronger.
Right.
It doesn't get weaker. It's, like you're training for a wrestling match. If you're wrestling all the time, you're getting stronger.
Right.
And you define your faith and you get committed to your faith. And so that's what I figured out. But my first inclination was that protection.
Right.
But
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I'm just so grateful for that analogy, I guess, because I really have never thought about it before, but it makes so much sense to me. I'm wondering if you have any tips maybe for someone who is going through a series of fatigue. I think it can be a loss where we're grieving or a health crisis, or it can be all kinds of things. It can also just be not just, it can be the busyness and the distraction that just feels really stressful if we're going through a stressful season too. And so
Mhm.
what's something that what's something that can keep us connected or keep us in the word that maybe you have learned feels a little less overwhelming for the days you just don't have what you wish you had, you know?
Mhm. I think one of the things I've discovered is that, when you're in a valley and it's just you're trying to get through, and we've all experienced that time where it takes everything we have just to get through the day. That's all we've got. And in those times, you just have to find a tether to God. You just have to hang on. And that's one of the reasons I love the Psalms, is because it doesn't take much. And it might not be the Psalms. It might be Christian music for a while. It
Right,
might be podcasts.
right.
It might be a little bit of a book. It might be a lot of things. But in that interim period where you're just trying to survive, you just have to find a tether.
Mhm.
And it doesn't have to be something that takes up a lot of time, and give yourself a lot of grace if you don't do it every day, but be aware and be looking for those different ways that you can latch on to God. And as you're doing that, they'll become more evident. Some people like to journal a little bit. There's so many different ways, but you have to be trying to find them,
Yeah.
and not making it a burden, but just actively seeking.
Right. I think short devotions when we're going through something hard, if you can keep I grew up in the United Methodist Church, so the upper room devotional is something that I've grown up with and done more of those than I know how to count, right? But the upper room devotional and a lot of denominations have something real similar where it's a verse of the day, a prayer and a short 200 word, maybe I'm just guessing, devotion that has like one point and it kind of seals it. I think that something like that, Jesus Calling, are those short devotionals. If you're familiar with those books, Sarah Young is the author of that book. Those, like, what I would say, really solid but small
Mhm.
1 point. This isn't a time to try to read through the Bible in a year, right? When you're going through that, it's
No.
just too much to absorb. It's too much,
Yeah,
and that's okay.
it
There's a
is.
different season for that. But and I love what's on a playlist that you have. What's a devotion in one song, or a devotion that you can go back to a couple times during the day or something if you're really
Mhm.
struggling. So I'm with you. Just like, what keeps you consistent? What can you do consistently much more than what can you do, like, it's not an amount, right? It's just these little nuggets that, yeah, that the Lord wants to point you to his faithfulness. And so how do we create just a little bit of space for him to do that?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, and as you were talking, I thought of, there's on the YouVersion app, there are really short devos that they'll
Yes,
push
that's
to
a
you,
yes, perfect. Yeah. Mhm.
and I can't think of which ones, but I have several that I will subscribe and get, like, just a text every day.
Yes.
And I think you can do that with Jesus Calling, where they'll send you just a little text or
Yes.
a little thought. And sometimes that's just enough to switch your day around.
Mhm.
So
Yeah,
I
for
would
sure.
I would
Yeah.
say find
Yep.
whatever
Mhm.
feels right to you
Mhm.
and go for that.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think another thing that helps when we're going through something difficult is to join. You were talking about how Psalms, and there was like a class at your university that got you in there. If we can build in a little bit of accountability,
Mhm.
with a group they're doing something that doesn't feel overwhelming, but they meet once a week or they meet every other week, and there's another group around you that knows you're going through something, and you can do a little bit of work. I'm going to say that lightly, but a little bit of study time, and then you can get together with people that builds in some accountability. And sometimes, especially like in a stressful slash busy season, we need that accountability to stay in there. I think that helps me a lot. I'm doing a Bible reading plan right now. I'm not in one of those kind of seasons right now. So I'm doing a Bible reading plan, but I am doing it with a friend because I know that part of the reason that I'm still doing it on day whatever I'm doing it right is because I meet with a friend on Tuesdays for lunch and we talk about how it's going, and that keeps me motivated too.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
so true. It's so easy to say, "Oh, I missed today. I'll come back tomorrow or the
Yeah.
next day." And
Yeah.
then
Yep.
yeah.
Yep. Right. Yeah. Yeah. So good. So good. So, well, talk to us a little bit about your book project.
Mhm.
It's called Divine Detour. What is it? What motivated? I believe it's from your health crisis, but what motivated you to write it? What are you hoping that it will do for people if they pick it up?
Oh, well, you're right. It's a book that was sort of born out of this health crisis, but it really is designed to help other people who are on a detour to confront their questions and look at them in a constructive way, in a faith building way, in a hope building way. And they say that when you title a book, the title is the premise, right? So the premise is Divine Detour, but the promise is the subtitle. And the subtitle of the book is The Path You'd Never Choose Can Lead to the Faith You've Always Wanted. And the whole book, it includes stories and journal entries and just little snippets, is just 40 essays. It's just 40 standalone essays that look at some challenges that we face when we feel like we've been detoured in life. And we're all kind of detoured in life in one way or another. But that was something that seemed to resonate with people, because people would read things I was writing and say, I don't have health problems. I certainly don't have heart failure, but I have a different detour. I'm experiencing divorce or a prodigal child or bankruptcy, on and on and on. And they could relate to what I was feeling, because all the detours of life bring up pretty much the same questions. And so those essays really look at what I think are the three questions that every life confronts, especially on a detour.
Oh, I love it. I love it. I love it. Well, listen, as we're wrapping up, I'm just wondering overall, do you have what kind of words of encouragement, maybe if someone's going through a difficult season? I mean, all of this has been encouraging, but if someone's going through a difficult season, a busy season, and they're just wondering, or that faith is on the shelf and they know it and they're resonating with that
Mm.
illustration, just is there anything that you could say that just encourage them?
Mm. I would say that God is so interested in just keeping the conversation going with us, whatever that takes. You think about history throughout scripture, he's gone to any length that he needed to keep the conversation going. And
Mm,
so however that looks in the valley seasons, in the detours, in the hard times, your job is to just keep it going. Like you said, when a season comes where you can dig in deeper, you will. But just know that God is not afraid of your questions. He's not afraid of your laments. He just wants to keep the conversation going with you.
I love that. And in a season you can dig deeper, you will. But I just thank you, Lorianne, for this reminder of just don't. It's so easy when we walk away for a time to not
Mm.
circle back around. And so I think it's
Yeah.
just really important that how do we keep the conversation going? I love that. How do we keep the conversation going? He knows what we have to give. And when we give what we have to give, it's enough. And I
Yes.
think that's important for us to remember too. Bring what you have, bring your laments, bring your questions. What did you say? God is not afraid of your questions and your laments. Is that what you said? I think
Yeah.
that's so good. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, friend, Lori Ann can be found at loriannwood.com. And her book that we've been talking about is Divine Detour. The path you'd never choose can lead to the faith you've always wanted. The path you'd never choose can lead to the faith you've always wanted. Anywhere else, I will link that. I will link other places to find and follow Lorianne in today's show notes. Anything else that you would like to say to the listener before we sign off?
I love I answer all my emails and all my uh, comments. So I'm Lori Ann Wood on pretty much all the social
All the
channels. So
things.
if
Okay.
anyone has a question or are struggling, I'd love to connect with them.
Thank you so much for serving us today. Really appreciate you. This has been a really important conversation.
Well, thank you for having me, Angie.
Yeah. And thank you, friend, for listening. Until next time, peace. God isn't afraid of your laments, my friend. I love that Lorianne reminded us of that. He's not afraid of your questions. And I encourage you, like she did, that whatever it is you may be dealing with right now, don't use it as an excuse to disconnect. Stay in the Word, stay in fellowship with other believers, and get that faith down from the shelf. I think you will find it's a lot stronger than you realized. If you haven't yet, I'd be so grateful if you would subscribe or follow the podcast on whatever directory you're using to listen. It only takes a second and it guarantees you'll see every episode as soon as they drop. And if someone came to mind today, I would love it if you would share this episode out with them. Inviting them into what we're doing is another great way to support the show. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I pray wherever your day takes you, you are walking in the confident knowledge that you are a beloved, cherished child of God.